The fluorescent lights hummed their familiar tune as I adjusted my ergonomic chair for what felt like the thousandth time. The customer service department of Sterling Financial stretched out before me like a maze of beige cubicles and motivational posters that had lost their meaning years ago. I was Sarah Chen, though everyone just called me Sarah, and for the past 8 years I had been the unofficial guardian angel of this place. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. My desk sat in the corner, strategically positioned where I could see everything but remain relatively invisible. 3 monitors displayed cascading streams of data, customer complaints, system alerts, and the intricate web of databases that kept our mid-sized financial services company running. Most people saw customer service as entry-level work, but I had turned it into an art form. The morning ritual began as it always did. Coffee from the break room, black with just enough sugar to take the edge off. Then the slow walk through the department, nodding at colleagues who had come to depend on me for solutions they couldn't find anywhere else. Maria waved from her cubicle, probably already dealing with her first irate customer of the day. James looked up from his screen with a slightly panicked expression that meant he'd encountered a system glitch that wasn't covered in the official manual. I had built something here, though it wasn't visible in any organizational chart or job description. Over 8 years, I had created an intricate network of workarounds, shortcuts, and solutions that made impossible problems disappear. When the database crashed and customers couldn't access their accounts, I knew which backup server to ping and which administrator password would get us back online in minutes instead of hours. When angry clients demanded refunds that the system claimed were impossible, I knew exactly which combination of codes would unlock the approval pathway. The knowledge had accumulated gradually, like sediment building layers over time. Late nights when everyone else had gone home and I stayed behind to figure out why the automated billing system was miscalculating fees. Weekend calls from panicked supervisors when the customer portal went down and I was the only one who knew how to restart the authentication servers. Quiet conversations with IT specialists who shared technical details because they trusted me not to break anything. But here was the thing that made me truly valuable. I understood people as much as I understood systems. Mrs. Rodriguez called every Tuesday, not because she had problems with her account, but because she was lonely, and our customer service line was the highlight of her week. I made sure her calls got routed to me, and I always spent an extra few minutes asking about her grandchildren. Mr. Peterson had early-stage dementia and couldn't remember his login credentials, so I had created an unofficial note system that let us verify his identity through questions about his late wife's maiden name and his first car. These weren't official protocols. They were human solutions to human problems, built on relationships and trust that couldn't be documented in any training manual. I had turned customer service from a cost center into something that actually retained clients, though I doubt the executives upstairs understood exactly how. The morning progressed with its usual rhythm of organized chaos. System alerts blinked on my secondary monitor while I handled calls on my headset, simultaneously troubleshooting database queries and walking nervous colleagues through procedures they should have memorized months ago. This was my domain, and I ruled it with quiet competence that made everyone else's job possible. Then Rebecca Morrison walked into my life like a storm front moving across an otherwise peaceful horizon. I first noticed her during the 11 o'clock staff meeting, sitting in the back row with the kind of rigid posture that screamed corporate consulting. Her blonde hair was pulled into a severe bun, and her navy suit looked expensive enough to cost more than my monthly rent. She carried herself with the particular brand of confidence that comes from MBA programs and corner offices, surveying our department with the calculating gaze of someone looking for inefficiencies to eliminate. After the meeting ended and people scattered back to their desks, she approached me with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Sarah, right? I'm Rebecca Morrison, the new director of operations. I've heard interesting things about you." I straightened slightly, sensing the weight of evaluation in her tone. "Nice to meet you, Rebecca. Welcome to Sterling Financial. I understand you're quite the problem solver around here. People seem to think you're indispensable." The way she said, indispensable, made it sound like a character flaw. I'd love to chat with you later about your role and how we might optimize your contributions. Optimize. The word hung in the air like a threat wrapped in corporate speak. I had heard that word before, usually right before people got laid off, or transferred to positions that were technically promotions but felt more like exile. Over the next 2 weeks, Rebecca became a constant presence in our department. She attended meetings with a leather portfolio and took notes that made everyone nervous. She asked pointed questions about workflow efficiency and resource allocation. She requested detailed reports about call volumes, resolution times, and customer satisfaction metrics that we had never needed to track so precisely before. I watched her move through the office like a predator studying prey, identifying weaknesses and redundancies. She spoke in the language of quarterly projections and operational streamlining, reducing our daily work to numbers on spreadsheets that could be manipulated and optimized. During conversations, she would nod thoughtfully while people explained their responsibilities, but I could see her mentally calculating whether those responsibilities justified a full salary. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. The writing on the wall became clearer when she started scheduling individual meetings with department veterans. One by one, she called people into the small conference room with the frosted glass walls. Some emerged looking relieved, others seemed shaken. Maria came out wiping her eyes and wouldn't talk about what had been discussed. When my turn finally came, I walked into that conference room with the calm certainty of someone who had seen this movie before and knew how it ended. Rebecca sat across from me with a folder that had my name written on the tab in neat block letters. The afternoon light streaming through the window caught the edges of her perfectly manicured nails as she opened the folder with ceremonial precision. "Sarah, I want to be completely transparent with you," she began, her voice carrying the practiced sincerity of someone who had delivered this speech multiple times. "You're clearly talented, and your institutional knowledge is impressive. But I've been analyzing our department's structure, and I see opportunities for growth and modernization." I remained silent, letting her continue while mentally preparing myself for the inevitable. The customer service landscape is evolving rapidly. We need fresh perspectives, innovative approaches, and frankly, more cost-effective solutions. Your role, while important, represents a significant investment that we need to justify in terms of measurable outcomes. The corporate euphemisms were flowing freely now. Fresh perspectives meant younger and cheaper. Innovative approaches meant untested methods that looked good in presentations. Cost-effective solutions meant my 8 years of experience were too expensive to maintain. "So here's what I'm proposing," Rebecca continued, leaning forward slightly as if sharing a secret. "We're bringing in someone new to take over your primary responsibilities, someone with advanced training in modern customer service methodologies and digital engagement strategies. Tyler Henderson has an impressive background in customer experience optimization, and I think he could bring exactly the kind of energy we need." Tyler Henderson. Even his name sounded like it belonged on a business school case study about disruptive innovation in customer service. "What I'd like from you, Sarah, is to help train Tyler during his first few weeks. Share your knowledge, show him the systems, help him understand our customer base. Think of it as mentoring the future of our department." The audacity was breathtaking. She wanted me to train my own replacement, to hand over 8 years of carefully accumulated expertise to someone who would undoubtedly be paid less and given credit for my innovations. I was being asked to participate in my own professional execution, but I kept my expression neutral, nodding as if this were a reasonable request from a thoughtful manager. "I see. And what happens to my position after Tyler is fully trained?" Rebecca's smile became even more artificial. "We're still exploring options. There might be opportunities in other departments, or perhaps a transition to a more consultative role. Nothing's been decided yet. Nothing's been decided yet." The oldest lie in corporate management, designed to keep people compliant while their replacements got up to speed. "When does Tyler start?" I asked, my voice steady despite the anger building in my chest. "Monday. I'd like you to work closely with him for the first month, maybe 6 weeks depending on how quickly he adapts. I'm confident that with your guidance he'll be able to hit the ground running." I stood up slowly, extending my hand across the table. "I appreciate you being direct with me, Rebecca, I'll do everything I can to make sure Tyler succeeds. She shook my hand, clearly relieved that I was taking this so well. If only she knew what I was really thinking. Monday morning arrived with unseasonable humidity that made my blouse stick to my back as I walked from the parking garage to the office building. The weekend had been spent in careful preparation, though not the kind Rebecca might have expected. I had used my access to the various systems to create something that would serve me well in the coming weeks. Tyler Henderson turned out to be exactly what I had expected, mid-20s, eager, and armed with enthusiasm that hadn't yet been tempered by experience. He had the kind of confidence that comes from academic success and internship programs, combined with just enough humility to seem coachable. His handshake was firm, his smile genuine, and his questions surprisingly thoughtful. "I've heard amazing things about you, Sarah," he said as Rebecca introduced us. "I'm really looking forward to learning from someone with your experience." I found myself almost liking him, which made what I was about to do feel less like revenge and more like education. "I'm happy to help," I replied, gesturing toward my corner workspace. "Let's start with the basics and work our way up to the more complex systems." Over the following days, I began Tyler's education with methodical precision. I showed him the customer database, explaining how to navigate the various screens and access customer histories. I walked him through the billing system, demonstrating how to process refunds and adjustments. I introduced him to our most challenging customers, sharing strategies for de-escalation and problem-solving that I had developed through years of trial and error. Tyler was an attentive student, taking copious notes and asking intelligent questions. He picked up the standard procedures quickly and seemed genuinely interested in understanding not just what to do, but why certain approaches worked better than others. The key to this job, I told him during our second week together, is understanding that every customer is dealing with their own stress and frustration. Our systems aren't perfect, and sometimes the official procedures don't solve the actual problem. That's when you need to get creative. I showed him examples of creative problem solving, how to escalate issues to the right departments, how to find alternative solutions when the first approach failed, how to use personal connections within the company to cut through bureaucratic delays. But here was what I didn't tell Tyler. Every password I was giving him was fake. The customer database required 3 different authentication levels, depending on what information you were accessing. I gave Tyler passwords that would work for basic lookups but fail when he tried to access sensitive account details. The billing system had administrative functions that could override standard limitations, and I provided him with credentials that would appear to work but would actually log failed access attempts that would eventually trigger security reviews. Most cleverly, I created what appeared to be a comprehensive list of system shortcuts and administrative codes. These looked legitimate, were formatted consistently with our other documentation, and would seem to work during supervised practice sessions. But each one was designed to fail at crucial moments, or to work only when I was watching and could secretly use my real credentials to make the system respond correctly. The beauty of this approach was its subtlety. Tyler wasn't encountering massive system failures that would immediately expose the deception. Instead, he was experiencing the kind of intermittent technical difficulties that every customer service representative deals with regularly. A database that sometimes wouldn't let him access account histories. A billing system that occasionally rejected his authorization codes. Authentication errors that seemed random but would become more frequent as he relied on the fake credentials without my supervision. During our training sessions, I would casually mention that the systems were, quote, a bit temperamental, and that he shouldn't be surprised if he encountered occasional glitches. I taught him to restart his computer, clear his browser cache, and try alternative approaches when the first method failed. All perfectly reasonable advice that would keep him busy troubleshooting problems that couldn't actually be solved with the credentials he'd been given. Meanwhile, I was documenting everything. Every fake password I provided, every system limitation I had created, every training session where Tyler had unknowingly been set up for future failure. I was building a comprehensive record of exactly what knowledge I was supposedly transferring and what Tyler was supposedly learning. By the end of the 3rd week, Tyler was handling basic customer calls with increasing confidence. He could process standard requests, look up account information, and resolve common problems without constant supervision. Rebecca observed several of our training sessions and seemed pleased with his progress. "He's a quick learner," she commented, after watching Tyler successfully help a customer reset their online banking password. "I think we're on track for a smooth transition." I nodded and smiled, knowing that Tyler's apparent competence was entirely dependent on my invisible assistance and the carefully limited scope of problems he was being allowed to handle. The real test would come when he was working independently, relying on the fake credentials and incomplete procedures I had given him. When customers called with complex problems that required advanced system access. When the database threw authentication errors that he couldn't resolve. When his supposed expertise revealed itself to be a carefully constructed illusion. But that revelation was still weeks away. For now, Tyler was learning, Rebecca was satisfied, and I was playing the role of the helpful mentor who was graciously training her replacement. The trap was set. All I had to do was wait for the right moment to let Tyler discover that everything he thought he knew about these systems was built on foundations of sand. The fourth week brought an unexpected challenge that would test both Tyler's confidence and my carefully laid plans. A major system upgrade was scheduled for the weekend, which meant Monday morning would likely bring a cascade of technical difficulties as various databases and applications struggled to sync with the new infrastructure. I spent Sunday evening at home, sitting at my kitchen table with a cup of chamomile tea, mentally preparing for what would unfold. The irony wasn't lost on me that I was probably the only person in the company who genuinely understood how these system upgrades affected daily operations. I had lived through 6 major updates during my tenure, each one creating unique problems that required creative solutions and deep system knowledge to resolve. Tyler would be walking into a perfect storm of technical complexity, armed with fake credentials and incomplete procedures. But he wouldn't be alone in his struggles. The entire department would be dealing with frustrated customers whose accounts might not display correctly, whose transactions might be delayed, and whose login credentials might need to be reset multiple times. Monday morning arrived with the predicted chaos. My phone started buzzing at 6:30, with text messages from colleagues who had arrived early and discovered that half the customer portal was displaying error messages. By the time I walked into the office, the department was already in crisis mode. Rebecca stood near the entrance, her usual composed demeanor showing cracks of stress as she fielded phone calls from upper management, demanding explanations for the service disruptions. She spotted me and waved me over with barely concealed desperation. "Sarah, thank God you're here. The upgrade went sideways and we've got customers calling in droves. I need you to help coordinate the response while Tyler handles the standard inquiries." I nodded calmly, already slipping into the role I had perfected over 8 years, the steady presence who could navigate any crisis. "What's the primary issue?" "Everything," Rebecca said, running her hand through her perfectly styled hair. "Account balances aren't displaying correctly, the payment processing system is timing out, and half our customers can't log into their online banking. IT says they're working on it, but you know how that goes." I did know how that goes. IT would eventually fix the underlying infrastructure problems, but they had no understanding of how those fixes needed to be implemented at the customer service level. They would restore database connections without realizing that our customer lookup procedures would need to be modified. They would update authentication protocols without providing the new administrative codes that would let us help customers reset their passwords. This was exactly the kind of situation where my years of experience became invaluable. Not just understanding the technical aspects, but knowing how to bridge the gap between what IT fixed and what customers needed. "I'll start working through the priority cases," I told Rebecca. "But I want Tyler to handle as much as possible independently. This is good experience for him." Rebecca looked uncertain. "Are you sure? This seems like a pretty intense first crisis for him to manage alone." "He needs to learn sometime," I said with what I hoped sounded like confidence in his abilities. "I'll be right here if he needs backup." What I didn't mention was that Tyler would need backup constantly, because none of the credentials I had given him would work during a system crisis like this. The fake passwords that might function during normal operations would fail completely when the databases were running in recovery mode. The administrative codes I had provided would be rejected by systems that were operating under temporary security protocols. Tyler arrived 20 minutes later, looking slightly frazzled but determined. He had clearly prepared himself for a challenging day, armed with the notebook where he had carefully transcribed all my instructions and the printed list of passwords and procedures I had given him. "Rough morning already?" he asked, noting the tension in the air and the unusual number of people gathered around Rebecca's desk. "System upgrade issues," I explained. "Nothing we can't handle, but it'll be a busy day. You ready to jump in?" "Absolutely," Tyler said, settling into his workstation and powering up his computer. "What's the game plan?" I handed him a stack of callback requests that had accumulated over the weekend, customers who had encountered problems and requested follow-up assistance. These would normally be straightforward cases, but with the current system instability, each one would require creative problem-solving and administrative access that Tyler didn't actually possess. "Start with these," I said. "Most should be routine, but if you run into authentication issues, just let me know. The systems might be a little temperamental today." Tyler nodded confidently and picked up his headset. I watched him dial the first number, his posture radiating the kind of optimism that comes from believing you're fully prepared for whatever challenges might arise. The first call went reasonably well. Mrs. Patterson needed help understanding a fee that had appeared on her statement, and Tyler was able to access her account history using the limited credentials that still functioned for basic lookups. He explained the charge clearly and professionally, and she thanked him for his help. The second call was where things started to unravel. Mr. Jacobson needed a substantial refund processed for an incorrectly charged overdraft fee. This required administrative access to the billing system, which meant Tyler would need to use one of the fake authorization codes I had given him. I watched from my peripheral vision as he confidently entered the credentials, waited for the system to respond, and then frowned at his screen. That's weird," he muttered, trying the code again. The system rejected it a second time, displaying an error message about insufficient authorization privileges. Tyler turned to me with a slightly puzzled expression. "I'm getting an auth error on the billing override. Is there a different code I should use during system maintenance?" This was the moment I had been preparing for, the first crack in his confidence, as he encountered a problem that couldn't be solved with the tools I had given him. I walked over to his workstation, looked at his screen with practiced concern, and entered my real administrative credentials to process the refund. "The systems are definitely acting up today," I said, making sure Mr. Jacobson's issue was resolved. "Try this backup procedure next time, but if it keeps giving you trouble, just flag me for assistance." I provided Tyler with an alternative approach that would work for very specific types of refunds, but would fail for most others. It was designed to look like a legitimate workaround while actually creating more opportunities for him to encounter problems he couldn't solve independently. The morning progressed with increasing frustration for Tyler and carefully concealed satisfaction for me. Each customer call revealed new limitations in the fake credentials and incomplete procedures I had provided. Database lookups would time out when he tried to access detailed account histories. Authorization codes would be rejected when he attempted to process anything beyond the most basic transactions. Password reset procedures would fail at crucial steps, leaving customers unable to access their online accounts. Initially, Tyler approached each failure with determination, assuming he was making procedural errors or dealing with temporary system glitches. He would try alternative approaches, restart his applications, and carefully re-enter the codes I had given him. But as the failures mounted, I could see doubt beginning to creep into his confident demeanor. "Sarah, I'm having trouble with the advanced database queries," he said during our mid-morning break. "The authentication keeps timing out, and I'm not sure if it's the system issues or if I'm doing something wrong." I had been waiting for this conversation. Tyler was beginning to realize that his supposed expertise was built on shaky foundations, but he wasn't yet ready to admit that the problem might be beyond his control. "Let me take a look," I said, pulling up a chair next to his workstation. I quickly accessed the database using my legitimate credentials, retrieving the customer information he needed with efficient keystrokes that made the process look effortless. "See how I'm navigating through the security levels?" I explained, showing him a procedure that required access codes he didn't actually possess. "Sometimes you need to approach these queries from a different angle when the systems are unstable." Tyler nodded attentively, taking notes on what appeared to be an alternative method, but was actually just the standard procedure performed with real credentials. he would try to replicate my actions later and fail, adding to his growing sense that he was missing some crucial piece of knowledge. By lunchtime, Tyler's confidence had visibly eroded. He was second-guessing himself on routine procedures, double-checking codes that had worked the previous week but were failing consistently now. His call resolution times were increasing as he struggled with authentication errors and system limitations that seemed to appear randomly. Rebecca stopped by our area during the lunch break, clearly stressed about the department's performance during the crisis. Customer wait times were longer than usual, and several complaints had been escalated to management level because representatives couldn't resolve seemingly straightforward issues. "How are things going over here?" she asked, though her tone suggested she already knew the answer wasn't entirely positive. "Tyler's doing great considering the circumstances," I said before he could respond. "System issues always make everything more challenging, but he's learning to adapt." Tyler looked grateful for my diplomatic response, though I could see the uncertainty in his eyes. He was beginning to suspect that his difficulties went beyond normal system maintenance problems, but he wasn't yet ready to voice those concerns to Rebecca. "I'm sure it'll get easier once IT gets everything stabilized," Rebecca said, though she didn't sound entirely convinced. "Just do your best to keep the customers happy." After she left, Tyler turned to me with an expression that mixed frustration with genuine confusion. "Sarah, can I ask you something honestly? Are there aspects of these systems that weren't covered in our training? I feel like I'm missing some fundamental knowledge that everyone else takes for granted." This was exactly the question I had been expecting, and I had prepared my response carefully. Tyler was smart enough to recognize that his struggles went beyond normal learning curve challenges, but he was approaching the problem with the assumption that he simply needed more training or better documentation. "Every job has a learning curve," I said with what I hoped sounded like encouraging sympathy. "These systems have quirks and unofficial procedures that only come with experience. Don't be too hard on yourself. I've been doing this for 8 years, and I still encounter situations that require creative problem solving." It was a masterful non-answer that acknowledged his concerns while redirecting blame toward the complexity of the systems rather than the inadequacy of his training. Tyler seemed somewhat reassured, interpreting my response as validation that his struggles were normal rather than evidence that he had been set up to fail. The afternoon brought new challenges that would test Tyler's resilience even further. A large corporate client called with a complex billing dispute that required access to multiple database systems and the ability to generate detailed transaction reports. This was exactly the kind of high-value customer interaction that required deep system knowledge and administrative privileges that Tyler didn't actually possess. I watched him attempt to handle the call with growing desperation as each system denied his access requests and every authorization code I had given him was rejected by the security protocols. The customer grew increasingly impatient as Tyler put them on hold repeatedly to troubleshoot problems that couldn't actually be solved with his fake credentials. Eventually, I had to intervene to salvage the customer relationship, smoothly taking over the call and resolving the billing dispute with the kind of effortless competence that comes from having real access to all the necessary systems. The corporate client thanked me by name and specifically mentioned how impressed they were with my knowledge and professionalism. Tyler watched this intervention with a mixture of admiration and growing realization that there was a significant gap between his supposed capabilities and the level of expertise the job actually required. He was beginning to understand that his training had been incomplete, but he still believed the solution was simply getting better documentation or more comprehensive access to the systems. "I think I need to request elevated privileges for my account," he told me after the call ended. "It seems like there are access levels that weren't included in my initial setup." This was the moment when Tyler's logical mind began to piece together the truth, though he wasn't yet ready to accept the full implications of what he was discovering. He was approaching the problem analytically, assuming that his difficulties were the result of administrative oversights rather than deliberate deception. "That's probably a good idea," I agreed. "You should definitely talk to Rebecca about expanding your system access. Some of these functions do require higher-level permissions." I knew that any request for elevated privileges would eventually lead to a conversation about why Tyler's current credentials weren't working. which would ultimately reveal that the passwords and codes I had provided were never legitimate in the first place. But I wanted him to reach that conclusion on his own, through his own investigation, rather than having it exposed through my direct action. The day ended with Tyler looking mentally exhausted, and Rebecca looking increasingly concerned about the department's performance during the system crisis. As people began shutting down their workstations and gathering their belongings, I could see Tyler staring at his notebook full of procedures and passwords that had failed him throughout the day. "Tomorrow will be better," I told him as we prepared to leave. "Once IT gets the bugs worked out, everything should run more smoothly." Tyler nodded, but I could see in his expression that he was beginning to suspect the problems ran deeper than temporary system maintenance issues. He was starting to question whether his training had been as comprehensive as he had believed, and whether the knowledge I had shared with him was as complete as it had appeared. As I walked to my car in the parking garage, I reflected on the day's events with a mixture of satisfaction and anticipation. Tyler was beginning his journey toward the truth, but he hadn't yet arrived at the full realization of how thoroughly he had been deceived. That revelation was still to come, and when it did, it would fundamentally change the power dynamic between all of us. The trap was closing, but slowly and methodically, exactly as I had planned. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.